Sarah Glynn from the Tayside for Justice in Palestine campaign, and also a member of Scottish Jews for a Just Peace. So thank you very much.
So clearly I bring support from both those organisations, and it's really uplifting to see the growing movement in support of the people of Palestine. And I think it's particularly uplifting to see it now, after the ceasefire, when the immediate demands of stopping the fighting have passed. The campaign that we're all part of is, of course, a campaign that's been going on for decades, and it could go on for decades more. And it's really important to build up a strategy of sustained action, action that's going to continue long past when this immediate anger has diffused and the memories of this last attack have faded. Well, faded here, I'm sure they won't fade over. And marches and occupations like this are an important part, but they're just part of an overall campaign. And we have to think of how to build on the momentum that we're creating. We don't just want to be able to respond to each outrage as it happens. We want to make it actually harder for the Israeli and US governments to impose their will in Palestine. And we don't want to be back here protesting about another war. So obviously at the same time as negotiating with the university now, you have to be thinking, what next? You know, supposing they say yes, what do we do next? And I think you've been given a few clues there about some other things that can be done in Fife. And also I'd urge you to try and join up with any organisations out with the university as well here. I mean, organisations like ourselves in Dundee, but also in Fife as well. But you know, the long term, the longer fight is why we're responding to the call from a whole range of Palestinian organisations, including trade unions, to boycott Israeli goods, and that's something that we've been fighting on very hard in Dundee. And obviously we hope to impact on the Israeli economy, and at the same time to send a message to the Israeli government that their actions aren't acceptable. But it's more than that, it's a way of actually spreading what we're doing to involve a much wider range of people. And we were out protesting, leafleting outside the new Tesco's in Dundee last week. And it was really encouraging because not only did most people, almost everybody, accept our leaflet and our stickers, but they knew why we were there. And they were really glad that we were there. So we could also build solidarity by making contact with people within Palestine and within anti-war movements in Israel and the US. And of course with the internet that's become easy for everyone, and even for those people who don't feel able to get involved in something like an occupation. They can even do it in the warm if they want to. But I think essential to any campaign, we need to understand the nature of what it is we're fighting, so that we can move beyond the humanitarian reflexes and beyond the obsession with things like what small event triggered the last war, and actually take in the bigger picture, and particularly in a university where you've got all the resources to hand. And obviously you had the meeting in Glasgow yesterday. We're planning a day school in Dundee, and that's obviously something that you could do here in St Andrews as well. So I'm afraid I'm going to go on with a bit of analysis, and yes, I was a university lecturer, so you'll have to forgive me. The Israeli government presents itself very much as the saviour and protector of the Jewish people, and expects people like me, because they are Jewish, in our gratitude to protect it from criticism. But of course I'm not grateful, I'm really angry. Everything that the Israeli government does, it defends by arguing that it's necessary for the security of its citizens. And it's really cultivated a myth of Israel as the perpetual victim in a hostile world, even though, of course, as we know, it has one of the most powerful armies and the full backing of the United States. And it poses as a victim to its own people as well as to everyone else. It pretends to be oppressed all the while that it's acting as the oppressor. For 40 years it's occupied Gaza and the West Bank, claiming that this is necessary for its own security. But this isn't about security, it's pure and simply colonialism. And we need to understand how Israel's been deliberately built up as the bulwark of US power in the Middle East, how Israeli foreign policy is dictated by the US imperialist project, which demands that potential sources of opposition are suppressed and demonstrates its power through its Middle East ally. We need to understand how Israel was used initially to control the spread of secular Arab nationalism, how it's now being used to control the growth of Islamism, how it was once used to provide a potential threat to Soviet expansion and is now ready to take on Iran. And we need to see how forces within the Israeli elite itself benefit from the continuation of tensions between different ethnic groups. So how this benefits not just the hugely profitable arms industry in Israel and the United States, but also many Israeli businesses whose economic growth is based on Israel's treatment of Gaza and the West Bank as colonies from which they're free to extract whatever resources that they want for themselves and to enjoy the ability to exploit cheap Arab labour. So political instability and a siege mentality is being used in Israel to justify strong state control and a very unequal society, and it's unequal not just between Jew and Arab, but also between Jews from different backgrounds and classes. So for those in power, it's a very classic example of divide and rule, and it produces fertile soil for the growth of prejudice and for those who want to exploit prejudice for their own ends. And I've concentrated very much on US-Israeli imperialism because this is the force, of course, that underlies what's happening. But I do think that it's important not to make the mistake of thinking that every group that opposes this imperialism deserves our support. So we can and we must support the Palestinian people and their right to self-determination and to resist the occupation. But I think it's still important to be critical of some of the actions of Hamas. And this is nothing to do with being a Jew. I want to feel free to criticise a government that's cracked down on left groups and trade union activity within the Gaza Strip and has employed military tactics that were predictably disastrous for the Palestinian people who they claim to be protecting. We need to be aware of when the Hamas leaders are acting against the interests of the Palestinian people, just as we are aware when the Israeli leaders are not acting in the best interests of the wider Israeli population. Hamas was able to grow because the Israelis, with the US behind them, had made sure to restrict the development of more secular nationalist forces, especially when those forces show an interest in socialist ideas or friendship with Moscow. The more secular Palestinian leadership that survived these attempts at political strangulation was pretty self-seeking and corrupt. Israel was also glad to see the Palestinian resistance split by the development of a rival force. Hamas and the Israeli government were both elected, but I would say from a pretty unenviable choice. And criticism of Hamas, or criticism of some of the groups as well in the Egyptian opposition, does not imply that Israel's actions are any more acceptable. And I think we just have to be very careful, in not saying our enemy's enemy is necessarily our friend, but working with people for one cause, but not just taking everything on board. We've got to be critical friends. International diplomatic pressure and Israeli pragmatism may help to bring peace for now, and negotiators do, of course, need to recognise the importance of bringing Hamas into any discussions. But Gaza is still under siege, and Palestinian land is still being seized in the West Bank, while the Palestinian population is being enclosed by an apartheid wall. A permanent solution will require a fundamental change in big power politics, and there's pretty little sign of that yet. And Obama obviously made pretty clear early on in his campaign for the nomination that he would continue US support for the Israeli link. But political analysis is crucial because if this situation is to change, then people first need to understand how they're being used in the bigger imperial game. So it's up to us and people like us across the world, and especially, of course, in Israel and Palestine, to expose the self-seeking motives of those in power who are encouraging and exploiting prejudice, so that we can then reach out across the divisions that they're creating. We're campaigning not just for peace, but for justice, for liberty, equality, and fraternity.